Welcome back to our coverage of ONS 2017. We're here talking about NFV security with Brenda Baim of TIA and Rajesh Godiar of Intel. And Rajesh and Brenda, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here, Abe. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Now, before we get started about talking really specifically about NFV security, I know there was an engagement between the Linux Foundation and TIA just yesterday on a panel. Brenda, if you don't mind, can you go over that real quickly for us?
So I want to thank the Linux Foundation for working with us and inviting us at the Open Network Summit to do this open secure network tutorial that we did yesterday morning. Rajesh was an important part of it from Intel, and we had also SEI from Carnegie Mellon. Chase did a fantastic job, and based upon the feedback we got from the audience, it's a very important topic for everyone. A secure network is a key part of the building blocks for NFV to be successful in rolling out an SDN network. And we're thrilled that we got to be in a leadership position and talk to it.
Now, of course, Rajesh, in a virtualized network environment, in a multi-vendor environment, security is a necessity, but it's also a major, major challenge for everyone really in this room right now. Can you really elaborate on that and what your position is on NFV security?
Yeah, sure. So, thanks to TIA and Brenda for hosting us yesterday. Security is on top of the mind for everybody in the progress that we are making with network virtualization, and we've made great progress with network virtualization over the last 3-4 years. And you've actually heard many service providers openly talking about the goals that they have set for themselves. I think AT&T talks about 75% network virtualization by 2020. Yeah. And as they do that, one of the things that they actually are worried about in this open platform where you have virtual network functions sitting on top of standard high-volume server platforms in a multi-vendor environment, how do they actually really ensure that everything is secure from the platform perspective and also actually the security functions that need to reside with the different applications in the network from the access through the network core and all the way into the cloud, right? And so we had some really good discussions yesterday. And we talked about where we are in the journey, you know, the issues that people have with respect to security solutions. The one thing that really came about, and I actually wanted to test this, so I actually talked about how largely when you look at data center security, it's about secure, the paradigm is actually secure the perimeter. Now, that is not going to be good enough when we actually virtualize the network functions and we go to NFV. And so security has to be more ingrained inside the data center, and you have to be able to create trust zones for the various tenants that you're hosting. So it was a good conversation from that standpoint to look at where we are today and then what needs to happen as you actually make security pervasive in the data center.
So, Brenda, at a show like ONS, security by design in software is one thing to talk about, but another, and maybe more in our sector at TIA, is security by design and hardware, and also to be able to work in confluence with that software. Is that the next iteration of NFV security?
I think it will be. I think John Donovan talked about that this morning at the keynote about that their next evolution is open white box hardware. Announced a great partnership with Intel about that, and how our whole networks are completely going to evolve. Google also talked about that this morning, and how we work together and how we build the right frameworks to make this work. You know, today with SDN, we're going to have an opportunity to take us with the service chaining from the very top of the application all the way down to the premise. And a lot of the questions are, what is a data center's responsibility, and what do we do to protect the network all the way down to the premise?
Now, I know at some point in this discussion we have to get to operationalizing NFV. Certainly a layer over many of other discussions, including security and NFV as well. Brenda, I'm going to start with you again, if you don't mind. I want to talk about where we are on the scale or on the cycle of operationalizing NFV, and then Rajesh, if you could talk about the security element to that.
So, you know, it's interesting. We decided at TIA this was going to be one of the major things we were going to focus on this year and probably in the 17 and 18. This is the major challenge for our membership and the industry on how to operationalize NFV. Due to that fact, we're actually going to be We have an entire program around it with key members like Intel and Dell and other large players in the industry and some of the smaller players working through what these challenges are to make it so these building blocks can work together, because it is the necessity that we actually can understand how a component will perform as it rolls out and it becomes a virtualized software component instead of just a purpose-built hardware. This whole evolution makes it where the paradigm has changed. If you want to find out how many customers can be supported on a virtualized CPE, if you want to understand how many data throughput you're gonna get, those kind of performance assessments, including also with security, is all part of the new paradigm that's got to be understood if we're going to have such things as self-optimizing networks and security perimeters.
Is a security element to that, Rajesh?
So let me actually talk about a couple of things, right? So when we look at security, it's very important to look at security holistically. So some of the things that we have actually been driving from an Intel perspective is starting with platform security. It's very important to actually make sure that as you're deploying these virtual network functions on standard general purpose hardware, there is absolutely no holes in the hardware or the platform software, right? So we actually put a lot of emphasis on making sure that there is a hardware root of trust, and technologies like TPM, the Trusted Platform Module, and the TXV, the Trusted Execution Environment, that can actually basically validate against that hardware root of trust, right? So that's where the security starts. The second part of this is actually data security. And what I mean by that is actually security for data that is on the platform, that is in use, and that is actually traversing the network, right? And so we've been actually putting a lot of emphasis on encrypted storage and encrypted memory. So the data that is actually used by a VNF is not visible to another VNF, and that you can actually really protect each of the data that is associated with each of the VNFs in a virtualized environment. And then the last one is actually, what do you do with actually security for data that is in transit? So these are technologies like the VPN technologies like IPsec and SSL. And the key thing there is really, how do you actually ensure that all this is done in a bump in the wire fashion? Because what you don't want to happen actually in, especially as we go to 5G, I think there's going to be performance, bandwidth, and latency challenges, and security should be just something that happens as magic, right? So it should not be impacting the latency and performance characteristics. So we actually try to do that, and the last element of this is actually NFV security. So how do you actually make sure that all the key things like virtual firewalls, the virtual load balancers, and the intrusion prevention systems, they are all actually functions that are optimized and that can reside with the different gateways and routers and those kind of functions, right? So we sort of like look at it from end to end, from all of these different things that need to happen to really make security pervasive and implement it for network virtualization. Now coming to your operationalization question, I look at it as performance, scale, and automation. I think those are the three things where we've made great strides, excellent progress over the last 3 or 4 years in our journey on network virtualization. But I think there's more work to be done in those three areas. So how do we actually scale when we put everything together? Because I think you can always sort of like make things work in a small environment, but it's really sort of like making it pervasive, common frameworks from an end-to-end perspective when you operationalize things, and how do you actually scale? So that's one. Performance, I talked about how everything needs to be bump in the wire, and you have to be able to deliver security with performance per watt per dollar. And then automation. This is the biggest one, right? So I think collecting all the data from the platform, all the telemetry data, and then applying intelligence to start with policy frameworks like what ONAP enables and what TI has been actually rooting for. So that we can actually drive some intelligent decision making. And maybe in future, actually the ultimate vision is, can we apply machine learning and deep learning for denial of service attacks and solving some of the security challenges that we have, right? So those are some of the things that I can think of actually from an operationalization standpoint.
Brent, I want to ask you, you've been in the industry long enough where I can ask you this question. Was it a perception by industry that maybe open source and security just sort of inherently were two opposing initiatives, and now at some point that changed, and now we're really on that open source is complementing security, or they're complementing one another. And by the way, if I'm completely wrong about that, let me know. But was there a time when those were considered opposing views?
Well, I think even software-defined networks was even an opposing view at one time period. And there still are camps in the industry that believe that having a virtualized software-defined network that's open is dangerous, and that's why these kind of tutorials are in place. And it does bring a complexity, but it actually brings opportunities. What we want to do in self-optimizing networks and the machine learning and all the pieces that Rajesh was talking to, we can now deliver on that promise based upon putting these building blocks in place. And let's think about what open networks really do for us. These open, collaborative communities help us make it speed to market. It's all about making it so that you can actually build upon the whole community of developers. That's why ONS is such a great conference, and that's why we're such a big supporter. Now, if you're going to utilize that, you have to make sure you put in place the right things to secure it. And the perimeter safety, the design security blocks that we're going to spend more and more time talking about at TIA is going to be an important part of this too, because it's the old story of what comes, if you've got to bring good in to bring good out. So you've got to ensure that the products you bring in from this collaborative community is good when you start.
Now, of course, there are some NFV benchmarking and security assessments that really act as a metric going from the cloud to premise. I know TIA is behind, or very much behind, that initiative. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, we're excited about this initiative. It's the beginning stages. We're in the working group stages and into launching the program itself. We are asking throughout our all of my visits that I'm doing these days as a new strategy officer here at TIA, asking for the leaders in the industry to actually come on board and be part of this new initiative, because we believe this will move and accelerate the time to market for the industry by being part of this. And we're very proud to have the partners we've already got as part of this.
So NFV security assessments and NFV benchmarking, Rajesh, what's the importance of industry being part of that, in particular Intel?
Well, we put a lot of emphasis on this. I really think that benchmarking is something that I think we need to, as a community, put a lot more focus, because remember what network virtualization and NFV is all about. It was very easy to go and actually get like a 10 gig router or a 20 gig security appliance, put it in the network, and you will get that performance. Now that you're actually virtualizing that function and you're deploying it on a standard server infrastructure, the question that people are asking is, okay, what does this translate to if I want to run a 10 gig firewall? How many cores is that, and how much memory do I need for this application, right? And to be able to answer some of those questions in terms of capacity planning, which is a big challenge for service providers, I think benchmarking is a very important element of that. And so we are looking forward to actually working with TIA. We have also actually tried to put together what we call as the network services benchmark and a few surrogate VNFs for security functions. SSL, TLS being one of them. We do network address translation, VNF, just to show what can be done on standard general purpose server hardware. And we've actually pushed some of this into OPNFV recently, but there is so much more to be done, right? I mean, this is, if we can actually rally the community to actually come up with like more standard benchmark practices that we can all adopt and could be speaking the same language, I think this would be huge for not just security, but the network virtualization movement in the industry as a whole. So I'm actually looking forward to really doing what we can as Intel, but then working with TIA and working with others in the community to drive that a little bit more aggressively going forward.
NFV security is certainly a group effort, an industry effort, so it's great that TIA can provide sort of that foundation to get people together and work on that. Brenda, thanks for your time, and thanks for bringing this initiative to our attention. And Rajesh, as always, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
All right.
This was very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for all of our coverage of ONS 2017, you can go to tianow.org. So long.